Welcome to Bookish Mind, Season 7, Episode 7, where we delve into Ben Horowitz's insightful book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, to explore the intense psychological battles and strategic choices that define true leadership. And this isn't, just another business book filled with abstract theories. Not at all. It's really raw, incredibly honest, a look at the emotional side, the strategic challenges, especially when things go completely sideways. It really gets into the human experience behind that CEO title. Strips away the glamour, shows the messy reality.
Absolutely. And our mission today really is to pull out those core insights. Leadership, courage, psychological resilience. It's all in there, straight from Horowitz's own very frank experiences. What's crucial here, I think, is that we're looking for lessons that apply broadly. Whether you're leading a huge company, a small startup, or honestly just navigating your own career path, there's just so much to unpack about what it really means to be in charge when the stakes are sky high.
Okay, so let's jump right in with a real gut punch of a story from Horowitz himself. He talks about this crisis right after they sold the Loud Cloud business to EDS. The company left behind, Opsware, was in, dire straits is putting it mildly. Their stock plummeted down to a shocking 35 cents to share. And their market cap, the total value, was literally half the cash they actually had in the bank.
Yeah, it's an almost unbelievable situation. And then, on top of that, NASDAQ basically delivers an ultimatum. Get the stock price back up to $1 within 90 days, or you're delisted. Gone.
Right, and this is where the leadership test really comes in, isn't it? How we responded.
Exactly. He was facing three stark, really painful choices. First, a reverse stock split, combine shares to boost the price. But everyone sees that as basically giving up capitulation. Or second option, let it become a penny stock, trading under $1. But that immediately rules out most big institutional investors. They just can't hold it. Third choice, hit the road, try to rally new buyers somehow.
Which sounds almost impossible in that situation.
It does. And you have to ask what kind of leader steps up then, especially when, as he says, the board is extremely sympathetic and open to every option, but, none of them look good. They all carry huge risks.
So Horowitz, surprisingly maybe, chose option 3, to hit the road. But like you said, who do you even talk to? Most big investors wouldn't touch a sub-$1 stock with a 10-foot pole. His networking guru, the famous Ron Conway, suggests this really unlikely meeting. Herb Allen of Allen & Company.
Right, the Allen & Company, famous for those exclusive conferences attracting people like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett.
Exactly. It felt like a total long shot.
And what's truly remarkable is how Herb Allen reacted. So Horowitz and Mark Andreessen, they lay out their case. They've got this $20 million a year EDS contract, a great team, good IP, clean balance sheet. They argue Opsware is clearly worth more than 35 cents. Allen listens, takes it all in, and then just says, understatedly, I'd like to be helpful. I'll see what I can do.
Which must have felt incredibly ambiguous, right? Like, what does that mean? Is it a polite brush-off?
You'd absolutely think so. But the outcome, it was astounding. Over the next couple of months, Allen & Company, Herb Allen personally, and some of their clients, they start buying Opsware stock. And that buying activity, it pushes the stock from 0 to 35 cents up to $3 a share in just a few months. They completely avoided delisting.
Wow. Wow. So years later, Horowitz finally gets the chance to ask Allen, why? Why did you invest when basically no one else would touch us?
And Allen's answer is just. It's a core nugget of insight for anyone in a tough spot. He said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, look, I didn't understand your business much or your industry. What I saw was two guys who came to see me when every other CEO was hiding. You weren't just not hiding. You were more determined, more convinced you'd succeed than guys running giant companies. Investing in courage and determination. That was an easy decision.
That's powerful.
Isn't it? If you zoom out, it really underscores this profound truth. In that crucible of crisis, sometimes a leader's sheer, unwavering courage and determination can matter more literally than the business specifics, at least in the eyes of someone experienced like Allen. It's not just about the numbers, it's about the mettle, the character.
That story flows perfectly into what Horowitz calls the most difficult CEO skill. And that's managing your own psychology. He's very honest about it. Admits he thought he was tough going in, but says he was soft until he really faced that intense mental pressure. He even likens it to the Fight Club of management. The first rule is you don't talk about the psychological meltdown.
That internal battle.
That unspoken suffering, that grinding weight when everything rests on your shoulders.
It really is. And why is it so hard? Well, first, as he points out, almost every CEO is learning on the job. You're facing this huge range of stuff you just don't know how to do, but everyone, employees, investors, the market, expects you to have all the answers instantly.
Yeah, the pressure must be immense.
And second, just the sheer difficulty of the task. Building a multifaceted human organization to compete and win in a dynamic, highly competitive market turns out to be really hard. He even jokes that if CEOs were graded like students, the average score would be like a 22 out of 100.
22, that's brutal.
Right. And nobody tells you that part before you sign up.
And then there's the other layer. When things go wrong, and they inevitably do, it's always your fault. As the founder, the CEO, every single problem, missed earnings, a key engineer quitting, a product delay, it traces back to you. There's literally no one else to point the finger at. That constant, crushing responsibility, plus knowing you're probably getting a D- grade, it just weighs on you. It's an immense burden.
And this creates this real dilemma. CEOs often fall into one of two traps. Mistake one, taking things too personally, getting defensive, maybe terrorizing the team, or literally making themselves sick with stress. Or mistake two, not taking it personally enough, rationalizing problems, blaming external factors, letting things slide, which eventually leads to the company decaying.
So finding that balance is key.
Exactly. The ideal, he says, is to be urgent but not insane. You have to separate the importance of the issue from your emotional culpability. Move fast, be decisive, but without beating yourself up constantly.
So what does this all boil down to for the CEO? Well, in his words, it's a lonely job.
You can't really confide fully in your employees, right? You risk causing panic. And external advisors, board members, they often lack the deep day-to-day context to give truly useful advice on those gut-wrenching decisions. Horowitz describes literally asking himself if he was right about LoudCloud's future strategy maybe 3,000 times during that crisis. Just grinding his brain into sawdust, he says.
It's almost unsettling how personal he makes it, isn't it? You really feel that burden. It reminds you that those polished CEO stories you usually hear, they rarely capture the full, messy internal struggle.
Think about Jason Rosenthal at Ning. He had to choose between huge layoffs, selling the company he built, or taking funding that would massively dilute everyone. These aren't just hard choices. Horowitz calls them migraine headaches. Rosenthal sought advice from the smartest people he knew, but in the end, he was completely alone in the final decision.
Yeah, and that just begs the question, right? How do you make those impossible company-altering choices when the consequences land squarely on your shoulders and yours alone?
Horowitz even coins a term for that feeling, that dark moment. WFIO stands for we're fucked, it's over. He says it's a common feeling during those life-threatening company crises, but importantly, it typically feels much worse than they are, especially for the CEO. Your perspective gets skewed by the pressure.
So it's about recognizing that feeling, but not letting it paralyze you.
Exactly. And he developed techniques to cope. First, he says, make some friends. Find other CEOs, other founders who understand that unique burden, who faced similar awful choices, people you can actually talk to. Second, get it out of your head and onto paper. Write it down. Separate the emotion from the logic. It helps you think clearly and make faster decisions. And third, maybe most importantly, focus on the road, not the wall. Concentrate on where you need to go, the actions you need to take, not just staring at the disaster you're trying to avoid.
Focus on the positive action.
Right. Ultimately, he says, great CEOs face the pain. They deal with the sleepless nights, the cold sweats, the self-doubt, and crucially, they don't quit.
That idea of not quitting, of pushing through, it reminds me of something else he brings up. He cites the legendary boxing trainer, Cus D'Amato. D'Amato apparently said the difference between a hero and a coward isn't how they feel, because both feel fear. It's what they do.
A powerful distinction. It highlights that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's about action despite the fear.
Right. Taking the punch, getting back up.
And in his VC work, Horowitz says he and his partners look for two main things in entrepreneurs. Brilliance, sure, but also courage. He found through his own experience and watching others that the most critical decisions you make as a CEO, they test your courage far, far more than your intelligence. Often, he says, the right decision is obvious, but the pressure to make the wrong decision can be overwhelming.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. A common one he mentions is co-founders struggling to decide who's ultimately in charge. Intellectually, they might know that having one clear decision maker is better for speed and efficiency, but the personal dynamics, the fear of hurting feelings or losing control, that pressure makes the obvious decision incredibly hard to execute.
Okay, that makes sense. But here's where Horowitz really goes against the grain, I think. He points out that sometimes the right decision isn't obvious at all. Sometimes it's complicated and maybe deeply unpopular. He tells this story about a founder CEO he calls Hamlet. This CEO was facing a lucrative acquisition offer. Most of his team, most of the board, they wanted to sell, take the money, and run. But Hamlet himself, he only marginally preferred not to sell. Just a slight gut feeling. And he had the courage to follow that slight preference against almost everyone else.
And Horowitz believes that single act of courage, going against the overwhelming tide based on a subtle intuition, turned out to be the defining moment of that CEO's entire career. The company went on to be much more successful. Now, if you zoom out from that, Horowitz introduces this concept of a social credit matrix. It's not a formal system, but this subtle, powerful dynamic in any group where your perceived value, your influence, is constantly being judged. And this matrix, he argues, often pushes you towards the safe bet. Go with the crowd. Because think about it. If you go against the crowd and you're wrong, you get downgraded, ostracized, or fired. Big penalty. But if you go with the crowd and you're wrong, minimum blame. We all thought it was the right move.
Safety in numbers.
Exactly. And that dynamic is precisely why courage is so critical. The pressure from the crowd, the fear of social penalty can cloud your judgment. It can make a clear decision feel like a 50-50 toss-up, even when your gut or the data points elsewhere.
Okay, so courage is essential, but can you actually develop it? Or are some people just naturally brave?
That's the hopeful part. He says courage, like character, can be developed. He's very open about his own feelings. Says he never felt brave, he always felt scared. But through practice, through facing hard situations repeatedly, he learned to ignore those feelings. That learning process, that act of making the hard choice even when you're scared, that is the courage development process. Every time you make the hard, correct decision, you build that muscle, you become a bit more courageous. And conversely,
Every time you take the easy, wrong way out?
you become a bit more cowardly. It compounds over time.
So how does this relate to how CEOs actually function day to day? Making those tough calls when maybe they aren't even sure they're right and everyone's pushing back.
This brings us to another really useful framework Horowitz uses. The idea of ones and twos in leadership. Think of it this way. Ones are the leaders who excel at knowing what to do. They're strategic thinkers, comfortable with ambiguity, good at gathering information and setting the vision. Often they're the founding CEOs, the innovators. Twos, on the other hand, are brilliant at execution. They know how to make the company run efficiently, how to implement the plan, set goals, ensure accountability. They build the operational engine.
Okay, so the visionary versus the operator, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. But the problem is, ones can sometimes get bored with the details of execution. They have the great idea, but they don't build the systems, and things descend into chaos. Twos, conversely, might be great at running the existing machine, but they can struggle with the big strategic pivots. They might get anxious making decisions with incomplete data, which is often necessary at the top.
So you need both.
Absolutely. A truly great CEO, Horowitz argues, needs both sets of characteristics. If you ignore one dimension, you're heading for failure, chaos if you're a one who can't execute, or stagnation and inability to adapt if you're a two who can't handle strategic ambiguity. And this also explains, he says, why CEO succession is so incredibly difficult. Often, the logical internal candidates are strong. Twos, they've proven they can run a division well, but the company, at that moment, might desperately need a one at the helm to navigate a major market shift or redefine the strategy.
That's a really interesting lens. Now, speaking of different styles, Bill Campbell, the legendary coach to basically every major tech leader, told Horowitz he was a rare peacetime, wartime CEO. Horowitz kind of jokes about it, saying he was a peacetime CEO for about 3 days and then wartime for 8 years. But this distinction, peacetime versus wartime, what does it really mean? And why is it so critical for a leader to understand which mode they're in?
It's a fundamental distinction. Peacetime is when your company has a significant advantage over the competition in its main market, and that market itself is growing. Things are generally stable, maybe even booming. In peacetime, the focus can be on expanding the market, reinforcing strengths, maybe exploring new initiatives. Think of Google's efforts back in the day to make the entire internet faster because a faster internet ultimately benefits their search dominance. That's a peacetime move.
Okay, so if things are good, focus on growth and optimization.
Right. Wartime, by contrast, is when the company faces an imminent existential threat. This could be fierce competition, a sudden market shift, a technological disruption, a major economic downturn. Survival is on the line. In wartime, the company must have, as Horowitz puts it, strict adherence and alignment to the mission. There's no room for error, no time for side projects. Think of Andy Grove at Intel. facing intense pressure from Japanese memory chip manufacturers. His decision to completely exit the memory business, Intel's original core, and bet everything on microprocessors. That's a classic, brutal wartime decision.
Wow, so the stakes are completely different.
And so are the required management styles. They are radically different. Peacetime leaders can encourage broad creativity, decentralized decision-making, things like Google's famous 20% time for engineers to work on their own projects. A wartime leader, totally different. They need precision, discipline, exact adherence to the survival plan. There's often zero tolerance for deviation. Think of Steve Jobs returning to Apple when it was literally weeks from bankruptcy. He slashed product lines, focused resources ruthlessly. That's wartime leadership.
It really highlights how context is everything.
It really does. And it explains why so many management books focus on peacetime techniques. They study successful companies, often during periods of relative stability and growth. But those techniques might be completely wrong, even disastrous in a wartime scenario. Horowitz lays out some really powerful contrasts. For example, a peacetime CEO knows and follows proper protocol. A wartime CEO often violates protocol deliberately to win faster. A peacetime CEO focuses on the big picture, the long term. A wartime CEO cares intensely about a tiny speck of dust if it interferes with the critical mission right now.
Detail-oriented out of necessity.
Exactly. A peacetime CEO might spend time carefully defining the company culture. A wartime CEO understands the war itself will define the culture. Every tough decision, every firing, every pivot becomes a cultural touchstone. A peacetime CEO has contingency plans. A wartime CEO sometimes just has to roll a hard six, make a huge, desperate gamble because there are no other options left.
High-stakes dice roll.
Pretty much. Peacetime CEO strives not to use profanity. Wartime CEO might use it purposefully for effect. Peacetime CEO works to minimize conflict. Wartime CEO often heightens contradictions to force clarity in crucial decisions.
It's a stark difference. So can one person actually be both? Can a CEO effectively switch between these modes?
Horowitz believes, yes, it's possible, but it's exceptionally difficult. It requires a deep understanding of all the standard management rules, but also knowing precisely when to follow them and, crucially, when to break them. It demands incredible adaptability and situational awareness.
Which brings us to another core idea. Being a CEO is fundamentally an unnatural job. He compares it to boxing, saying it requires lots of unnatural motion. Our basic human instinct, honed over millennia, is to do things that make people like us, right? It helps us survive in the tribe. But a good CEO often has to do things that upset people, at least in the short run, to achieve the necessary long-term outcomes for the company.
That's a great point. And the most fundamental, unnatural atomic building block of all these CEO skills, he argues, is giving feedback, especially critical feedback. He uses this funny illustration. Imagine trying to give your friend critical feedback on a story they just told you to be funny. Like, well, the pacing was off and the punchline didn't quite land. It feels totally bizarre, right? Almost rude.
Yeah, completely unnatural.
Yet, constant, direct, candid feedback is absolutely crucial for a CEO to build a high-performing team. So the question becomes, how do you master something that feels so inherently awkward and unnatural?
And he's pretty critical of the common techniques, isn't he? Like the shit sandwich.
Oh, yeah. He dismantles it. The whole compliment criticism, compliment routine. He says it feels formal, it lacks authenticity, and senior employees see right through it anyway. He even shares this anecdote where an employee basically told him, "Spare me the compliment, Ben, and just tell me what I did wrong."
Ouch. Direct.
But effective. Horowitz argues that true high-frequency feedback isn't some kind of performance or technique. It's about building a genuine, consistent dialogue based on trust.
So what are the keys to doing it right then, if the sandwich is out?
The keys are surprisingly simple, but again, hard to master consistently. Be authentic. You have to actually believe what you're saying. Come from the right place the employee needs to feel you're genuinely in their corner, wanting them to succeed, not just criticizing. Don't make it personal focus on the work or the behavior, not the person's character. Don't ever clown people in front of their peers. Public embarrassment is toxic. Match your tone and style to the individual's personality. Feedback isn't one size fits all. And finally, be direct but not mean. Instead of watering it down, say something like, "Look, I couldn't follow your presentation and I didn't really understand your main point." It's clear, actionable, even if it stings a little.
And what really stands out there is the idea he stresses. Feedback should be a dialogue, not a monologue. The CEO isn't always right. Employees should feel empowered to push back, to argue their case, to reach a conclusion together.
Precisely. And that ties into the importance of high-frequency feedback. When the CEO is constantly giving feedback, positive and negative, big and small on everything, two really positive things happen. First, feedback stops feeling so personal and loaded. It just becomes part of the normal workflow. Second, people get comfortable discussing bad news. It creates a culture where bad news can travel fast, which is absolutely critical for a CEO to identify and address problems quickly. Horowitz is very clear: feeling awkward, feeling incompetent when you first start doing these unnatural things. That's normal. That's part of the process of getting made as a CEO. It's how you learn and develop those essential muscles.
Okay, so building on all this, the psychology, the courage, the feedback, how should we actually evaluate a CEO? How does a board or even we as observers know if someone's doing a good job beyond just the stock price today?
Horowitz proposes three key questions, moving beyond just the lagging indicators like quarterly results. First, does the CEO know what to do? This digs into their strategic capability. Does the company have a clear, coherent story or strategy? And how good is their decision-making process? Are they fast? Is the quality good? Do they have the courage to act with incomplete information? Are they constantly learning and gathering knowledge? His own decision, remember, to sell LoudCloud and pivot to Opsware. He admits it would have failed a popular vote at the time, but strategically it was the right, albeit painful, move for survival and eventual success.
Right. So strategy and decision quality. What's the second question?
Second, can the CEO get the company to do what she knows? This is all about leadership and operational skill. Can they actually implement the strategy? Can they build a world-class team? Can they create an environment where talented people can actually get stuff done effectively? Think of something like Netflix's famous freedom and responsibility culture that's about enabling execution.
Knowing what to do and getting it done. Makes sense. And the third?
The third question ties back to results, but with a crucial caveat. Did the CEO achieve the desired results against an appropriate set of objectives? The key here is setting the correct objectives in the first place. You have to evaluate performance against the company's unique situation and opportunity, not some generic benchmark. He shares this fascinating anecdote about Robin Lai, Baidu's CEO. After their IPO, the stock soared way past expectations, but Li apparently felt miserable. Why? Because he suddenly felt this immense pressure to deliver results justifying a much, much higher valuation than he'd ever planned or prepared for. The objectives had implicitly dramatically shifted.
So the context of the results matters hugely.
Absolutely. The universal lesson, Horowitz stresses, is that direct results, revenue, profit, stock price today, are often lagging indicators. They tell you what has happened, reflecting past decisions. Those first two white box criteria, knowing what to do, strategy, decision-making, and getting the company to do it, leadership operations, those are much better predictors of future success. You need to look inside the machine, understand the process, not just glance at the scoreboard.
That's a really powerful framework. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things, what really stands out to you? For me, it's crystal clear that real leadership isn't about having all the answers or being naturally fearless. It's much more about, well, having the courage to face the scary unknown, managing that intense inner psychological battlefield, and mastering these fundamentally unnatural but absolutely essential skills like giving truly direct feedback.
I completely agree. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, Horowitz has this great concluding thought. He says that while technology might have lowered the financial bar for starting a company today, it's cheaper than ever in some ways. The courage bar for building a truly great company remains as high as it has ever been. Which leaves us, and maybe you listening, with an important question to mull over. How will you consciously develop your own courage? How will you prepare yourself to make those lonely, difficult, and right decisions when they arise in your own journey, rather than defaulting to the popular, easy, and wrong ones? It's something worth thinking about.